Welcome to the award-winning Thoughts from a Page podcast, a member of the Evergreen Podcasts Network, hosted by me, Cindy Burnett, a voracious reader and book columnist who provides you with casual author conversations and book recommendation episodes, as well as insider information on all of the newest releases that I personally endorse and on the publishing industry in my Behind the Scenes series. With so many books coming out weekly, it can be hard to decide what to read, so I find the best ones and share them with you. For more book recommendations or to find my backlist of interviews, visit my website at thoughtsfromapage.com. Have you read a book recently that really resonated with you and makes you want to read a book more like it? If so, submit a read-alike request to me through my Google form located in today's show notes and tell me why you loved it, and I will suggest some similar reads on a future Tuesday episode. If you're interested in reading some great books before they publish, I hope you will consider joining my Patreon group to access additional content, including early reads and pre-pub author chats and bonus episodes. I just added Banyan Moon by Tao Tai for May and The Bones of the Story by Carol Goodman for June. The link to join is in the show notes. Today, I am chatting with Jane Roper about the Society of Shame. Jane is the author of 2 previous books, a memoir, Double Time, and a novel, Eden Lake. She is a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop and lives in the Boston area with her husband and 2 children. I hope you enjoy our conversation. And now for a quick break. For the last year, I have been focusing more on my health and eating habits. In connection with that, I have started drinking AG1 in the morning. When I started drinking AG1 daily, I could feel a real difference in my health and energy levels. That is because AG1 is a foundational nutrition supplement that supports your body's universal needs like gut optimization, stress management, and immune support. Since 2010, AG1 has led the future of foundational nutrition, continuously refining their formula to create a smarter, better way to elevate your baseline health. I recommend AG1 to all of my family and friends because the company has a team of doctors and scientists. It is tested for 950 contaminants and is NSF certified for sport. It is formulated based on the latest science, and it maintains high quality standards. Thanks AG1 for sponsoring my show. AG1 is a supplement I trust to provide the support my body needs daily. If you want to take ownership of your health, it starts with AG1. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3K2 and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase. Go to drinkag1.com/thoughtsfromapage. That's drinkag1.com/thoughtsfromapage. Check it out. And now back to my show. Welcome, Jane. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you. It's great to be here.
I'm so glad you're here because I loved the Society of Shame after Jenna Blum told me about it when she came on my show.
Thank you. I love Jenna Blum.
Well, before we dive into my questions, would you give me a quick synopsis of the Society of Shame for those that won't have read it yet?
Absolutely. So the Society of Shame is about Kathleen Held. She's a 47-year-old wife and mother in the throes of perimenopause who comes home one night to find her garage on fire, her politician husband in his underwear, and an attractive young staffer from his campaign passed out nearby. She thinks things cannot get any worse, but then a bystander on the scene takes a photo that happens to capture a big period stain on the back of her pants. And the photo promptly goes viral. And basically overnight, she becomes an internet celebrity and the unwitting figurehead for a brand new menstrual justice movement called #YesWeBleed. So yeah, and what follows from there is quite a crazy adventure. So the book is really it's a satire of internet culture and online shaming and 24-hour news cycle, but it's also a mother-daughter tale as well.
And politics a little bit as well.
For sure, yes. Politics, media, scandal, all that kind of stuff.
You had 2 starred reviews, which is amazing. Booklist, and then Kirkus, which is the one people always are worried about.
Yes, indeed. Terrified. So that was quite a lovely, lovely surprise, a big relief.
That had to be. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Well, I am dying to know how you came up with the idea for this book. The entire time I was reading it, I was laughing. I was really enjoying it. But I was really also wondering, where did she get the idea for this one?
Sure. Yeah, well, it's funny. It's kind of a strange, twisted little path. But I heard or saw a story online a few years ago about a man who came home to find his wife and her lover who the lover happened to be her mechanic, dead in their garage because they'd been fooling around in the parked car and died of carbon monoxide poisoning. And which is a horrible, terrible story. But it got me thinking about just how humiliating that must have been for the husband. And it got me thinking about shame and humiliation in general. And as a sort of creature of the internet, I've always been very interested by this sort of phenomenon of online fame and online shaming. So as I was turning the story around in my head, it sort of evolved. And I thought, well, I want to write something funny. So I can't have people die at the beginning. But I did love this idea of someone coming home to find their spouse in an affair. And then I thought, well, how can I make this into an even more shameful and humiliating event? And then I was thinking, what's the worst thing that could happen? The most humiliating thing for a woman to undergo, in many of our lives, right, in our experiences is, oh my God, if you have a period leak, it's just so embarrassing. And I kind of went from there, and it became this crazy exploration of shame and of periods also, and why we are so embarrassed about them when they're just a normal bodily function. Yeah, so that's the kind of crazy origin story.
Well, it's such a unique story, which is one of the things I really enjoyed about it.
Oh, thank you.
And it's also so funny. Are you funny in real life?
I like to think I am, yeah. But in my fiction writing, I was trying to be very serious and do, good, serious literary writing. And I didn't have a whole lot of fun, but I kind of felt like, well, this is what I must do. And I had not a ton of success with it. And it really wasn't until I kind of let loose and found the voice and the fun in the Society of Shame that I was really able to bring humor to fiction. And I had such a blast writing it, way more fun than I had writing any of the more serious fiction that I used to try to write.
Well, it's so much fun to read. I'm sure it was so much fun to write.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it was fun. I mean, it's always fun when you can actually make yourself laugh occasionally while you're writing. So.
And you mentioned internet fame. And that's one of those things when that first began and my kids would talk about these people. And I'm like, who and where are they? And how did you learn about them? It's such a mind-boggling thing, or at least it was for a while. It's so common now that you can become famous from the internet.
Yes. And famous just for being famous. Yeah.
Right.
It is crazy. I mean, my kids, I have teenage twins who are 16, and one of them is really into TikTok. And, they have this whole cast of characters that they know are just TikTok celebrities. So yeah, it really is fascinating. And sometimes it's people who want to be famous, but then a lot of times you have people who definitely do not want to be famous. Who, for some embarrassing thing happens, or they do something lousy and become famous for that. But that's the crazy thing about the internet and internet fame is you never quite know what's going to get picked up and go viral and turn you into an internet celebrity, or I think how you'll react to it, because I think different people react very differently.
And sometimes it's fleeting and sometimes it's lasting, and it's really hard to predict what's going to be what.
Yes, exactly. And one of the, interesting challenges with the Society of Shame, it takes place over a month, 28 days actually, which is not a coincidence, one menstrual cycle. And I had to really, so much of the time, if someone becomes an internet celebrity, it really only lasts for a week or two. So I had to sort of figure out, okay, let's, I need to stretch this out a little bit and at the same time sort of compress the arc of her character. So it was balancing the way that internet and the news, are so fickle and move so quickly. But that's part of the plot is also Kathleen becomes drawn in and wants to maintain her fame after a certain point, and how she's trying to do that, knowing how quickly fortunes change and how fast the news cycle goes, especially when you're dealing with things online.
You do highlight that with the 24-hour news cycle, how the newscasters are looking for stories all the time because it's really hard to have to constantly be reporting on something.
Yeah, exactly. And they'll seize on just about anything. And I had fun coming up with some kind of absurd examples of that, of the most ridiculous things that sometimes end up getting into the news.
The other thing that you tackle is the movements and the hashtags, and how there'll be one movement and all of a sudden then it gets upended and there's a movement that came out of that movement, and it's just almost a domino effect.
Yeah, totally. That was a lot of fun to play around with. And I think, some of the movements that have happened online have been incredibly important. I mean, Me Too is, of course, the prime example of that. But, there are the smaller hashtag trends and stuff. And yeah, for this one, I had hashtag Yes We Bleed, which is the main thing, but it ends up spurring, some sort of breakaway movements like Yes We Age, and then hashtag men bleed too, and hashtag all blood matters. And so, I tried to also reflect the sort of infighting that happens anytime you get a big movement. You're always going to have then the people within the movement fighting about whose version of the movement is more pure and so I have with these menstrual rights and destigmatization folks, you have the pad and tampon people fighting with the menstrual cup people who are the environmentalists because, tampons and pads are bad and everyone should be using menstrual cups, and they're all fighting for the same thing, but then they end up fighting with each other over the details. So that's something that was kind of fun to explore.
I loved that. And I wondered, as you were working on all of it, if you had to really think through, okay, how crazy can I get? How ridiculous can some of this get? Because it gets ridiculous in real life. And so I was wondering in your fiction if you had to kind of temper yourself or if you went down all these different roads, how all that worked.
That's a great question. Sometimes people say these days, like, satire isn't possible because life is so ridiculous. And to some extent, it does feel true. So with this book, I wanted to make it, I knew if I made it absurd right from the get-go, that sort of would give me permission to be as absurd and over the top as I wanted throughout the rest of the book. And so I started big with this kind of ridiculous scene with the garage on fire and this taxi driver who takes this photo that captures Kathleen's period stain. And I went big right from the start. But there were times where I had to kind of ask myself, all right, is it so silly that it's going to distract from the plot or from the sort of some of the real emotions and real issues that I wanted to explore? So it's a tricky balance. It's definitely a tricky balance. But when I was working with my editor and my agent developing the book, they were good about being like, okay, settle down, girl. Like, you've got 3 ridiculous things in a row here, and maybe just one is good. And that way, it seems funnier if there's just one as opposed to 3.
Well, and this is something that I often talk about with authors, that truth is stranger than fiction. But when you're writing fiction, sometimes readers are like, oh, there's no way that could really happen. And it's often the things that have really happened that readers are saying that about. So you have to walk a fine line.
Yeah, totally. That is so true. And I mean, that's what's kind of freeing about writing humor, writing satire. No one's going to say, well, that would never happen. Because, like, yeah, of course not. That's the point. That would never happen. But again, it's like, things happened as I was writing the book that where truth and fiction sort of melded. So there's one example where a politician gets caught for having funded abortions for a mistress. And he's a politician who has been very pro-life and very opposed to choice. And it wasn't, I mean, that I had written like a year and a half ago. And then along came the Georgia Senate race, and Walker, I believe that was his name, right?
Yes, yes.
Right. Who, the same thing. They found out he had been paying for these abortions for women. And, he was supposed to be this anti-choice politician. So it's like, wow, okay, there it is right in the book. Not that that's not like a crazy example, but still, when you're writing about current events, truth often imitates fiction.
Especially in politics.
Yes, for sure. For sure.
Well, can we talk about the Society of Shame without that being a spoiler?
Oh, yeah, I think so. Yes. The society itself, sure. Yeah, so the Society of Shame as a thing in the book is a secret society for people who have been publicly shamed or humiliated. And Kathleen intercepts an invitation to it that's actually meant for her husband, since he was the politician who had an affair. But she intercepts it and shows up. And the society is run by a best-selling author, romance author, who had been canceled, disgraced for some remarks that she made. And now she runs this society to help people get their lives back on track and sort of regain control after they've had these scandals happen. So she finds herself in with this motley sort of group of people, some of whom are more forgivable than others. But yeah, I don't want to give too much away about who the members are, but one of them, for example, well, they were captured in a photo mooning some folks, and another one was an actor who sort of was brought down in a Me Too sort of scandal. They eat a lot of really good food and drink a lot of really good drinks at their meetings, so that was fun to write.
They do. And then her whole process, the woman who runs it, is so darn funny with all the re's, reconnect, repair, restart. Everything has to start with RE.
Yeah, she's got a shtick. Yeah, she has a whole menu of options that people can pick from, sort of how they're going to rehabilitate their lives. Yes, she's very, Danica is her name. She's very influential, and charming. She's got definitely a little evil to her too. And she steers Kathleen in a direction that at first seems great, but as things proceed, it's not clear whether that's the best direction after all.
So Kathleen is really struggling with her sense of self, even probably as the book opens, and has to work through a lot to redeem herself eventually. What was that like, that writing that character arc?
That was really quite satisfying. I feel like a lot of women at midlife, myself included, sometimes we sort of stop and say, where, has my life gone in the direction I wanted it to go? Here I am. I've got, maybe kids who are getting older. Maybe I haven't worked in a while, or I haven't really focused on myself or my career in a while. And in Kathleen's case, she's really let herself fall in the shadow of her husband, who's this very charismatic politician who's running for the Senate. And when this thing happens to her, she has to reassess and say, well, do I want to just, maybe I want to be out front, maybe I've been in his shadow for too long, or maybe I've put too much of myself and my ambitions aside. So this thing that happens where this, period stain seen around the world makes her an overnight celebrity, she really has to confront that and decide, like, who am I? And how am I going to let the forces beyond my control of the internet determine that, or in the fame machine determine that? How am I going to figure out what's most important to me? Where are my values? And there was a lot of rich territory, I felt like, to explore, even amidst all the silliness. And Kathleen has a very sweet, precocious young daughter, a 12-year-old named Aggie is very pure and has a lot of conviction. So while Aggie is very steady and sure of who she is, her mother is kind of vacillating wildly. And I had fun writing the contrast between that, the sort of wisdom of youth versus confusion of adults.
And so many reviews and reviewers have commented on how much they loved the mother-daughter relationship in your book.
Yeah, that makes me so happy. I'm really glad that people like that. And it's certainly inspired by my own two kids. And there's certainly a lot of both of them in the character of Aggie. So that was fun to write. And I'm glad that sort of tenderness of that story is coming through to folks.
Definitely. And Aggie was definitely the more steady one, while Kathleen was trying to figure out what in the world she wanted to do. And then once things kind of go awry, how she's going to handle everything.
Yeah, exactly. Aggie, straight through, is very sincere, and she really latches on to the whole Yes, We Bleed movement. She thinks it's great, and she wants to get involved, and she gets her friends involved, and she doesn't really care what her peers think about that. Whereas her mother, Kathleen, is so much more concerned with what other people think, both about herself, and is worried for Aggie, like, oh my God, this is going to be social suicide for you. Are you sure you want to do this? And Aggie's kind of like, Mom, I got this. It's all good. What's going on with you? So, yeah, she was a fun character to write.
And then you also address cancel culture, which I think is one of those things that is just getting trickier and trickier. Was it hard to write about it and make sure you felt comfortable with what you were writing?
Yes, that was definitely tricky. And yet it's something that I absolutely took on and wanted to take on in the book, because I think it gets oversimplified so easily in most discourse about it. I mean, I think even the term cancel culture, like, nobody really knows what that means, right? There are some folks who say anytime you criticize someone, you're canceling them. And then other folks who, say, well, no, that's not exactly what it is. And there's so much nuance that gets lost in conversations about it, but also about when people are shaming or calling out folks online as well. People often get kind of flattened to caricatures of themselves. So I wanted to really hold up a mirror to the whole cancel culture debate more than anything else, and just show lots of different sides of it, and maybe just get people thinking and asking some questions about where it's important, where it works, where it goes too far, and maybe how we could all approach it with a little more nuance and a little more compassion for everyone involved, both those who commit sins and those who are, victimized.
And it's such a difficult thing because I think so many people jump on the bandwagon, often with very little of their own knowledge.
Yes, totally. Yeah, so much of the time online shaming becomes a big pile on, so people who don't even know firsthand what happened. I think there's something really, I think as humans, we can't help ourselves. There's a sort of a surge, a feeling of power, adrenaline, where you're like, yeah, get them. I've certainly done it myself. And I think one thing that people can fall into is feeling like by piling on or by criticizing someone publicly, they are, I don't know, being virtuous or being activists. And it's not necessarily the case. I try to ask myself these days, okay, if I want to amplify this misdeed that someone did, or if I want to join in condemning someone, is that the best way for me to make a difference to this cause that this is all about, or is there a better way? And it may be different case by case, it all very much depends on the situation. So again, that's why I feel like fiction is such a great means to explore complicated stuff like this. And I wanted to make sure that I was looking at the full range, right? Looking at things from both the left and the right I have my own political convictions, but in terms of showing how people have, how the whole cancel culture debate or phenomenon plays out from different political perspectives and how different people perceive it, that was really important for me to explore. But to make it funny, I wanted to make it funny. I'm sounding very serious right now, but humor is often the best way to elucidate very serious things, I think.
I agree. First, the book is incredibly funny, but I think you tackle important topics. And those are really my favorite reads, where there is depth to the story, but it's fun to read and I'm laughing out loud. And it did make me think about a lot of these things.
Good. I'm glad. Thank you. I love that. Is great to hear. The goal is to make people laugh first, but then also think. So, and I love those kinds of books too. Of course, if you ask me right now to name one, I probably won't be able to, but I always love when I, find, actually, I could name a couple. I think Dietland by Surrey Walker is a great example of something that's sort of satirical and very darkly funny, but also makes some great points about feminism, about diet culture, about beauty culture. Always on the lookout for books that are funny and thought-provoking.
One that I always recommend is Angie Cruz's book from the fall, How Not to Drown in a Glass of Water.
Oh, I haven't read that yet.
So it's totally different issues, but it is hysterically funny. But it is talking about immigration and gentrification and community and just all of those things brought together. But it is really, really funny.
Oh, awesome. All right. I will definitely put that on my list. That sounds great.
Yes. So what was the highlight of writing The Society of Shame?
I think the most fun for me was writing the sort of interstitials throughout. So, in the book, there are, there's the normal narrative, but also I have little pieces of transcripts from shows, of newspaper articles, blog posts. One is a, art exhibit description. So there are these fun little parody kind of pieces that provide an outside perspective on all the stuff that's happening around the Yes We Bleed phenomenon. And those were really fun to write. I've always loved doing parody sort of stuff. So those were a blast to write.
I always like unique formats. So it's fun for me when there are things like that are breaking up the regular prose.
Yeah, I do too. They're like a little, what is it? Like the thing between the palate cleanser between the courses, like your little sorbet. Where'd You Go, Bernadette did that really well. That was another very funny novel, but I remember being really struck by that. I think that was the first book I read, and it was over 10 years ago now, that really used that sort of thing, correspondence and emails, and to tell the story. So I certainly had that in mind.
Definitely. I love that book. I remember exactly where I was when I was reading it, because I was volunteering at one of my kids' middle schools and I was in the computer lab while people were registering. And I was just laughing out loud over and over again. And people were looking at me like, what is going on? And I'm like, I'm
Yeah.
reading the funniest book.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, that book is total like laugh out loud funny.
So what about your title? Obviously, it comes from the society that's in the book. But was it always your title, or did you all land on that after going through a variety of titles?
That was always the title. And I think really once, as I was writing, when I started writing the book, I hadn't yet, I found my way to the idea of this society, of this club. But as soon as I came up with the name, the Society of Shame, I was like, yep, that's what the book's got to be about, because it's, it speaks to the larger idea of shame in our society and how it's such a big part of our culture these days. And yeah, luckily neither my agent nor the publisher tried to convince me to change it. So yay.
It's a great title and obviously makes a lot of sense once you've read the book.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. I'm usually terrible at titles. So, like the last novel I wrote, which wasn't published, had I don't know, 22 different names and they all sucked. So I was really happy to have one where I was like, all right, this is the title. This is it. Done.
The title seems to either be the initial title that the author came up with, or they've gone through 1,000 different titles trying to come up with something that makes sense. It doesn't seem like it's ever in the middle. It's just super easy or super hard.
That sounds about right. Yep. And what stinks is I definitely have writer friends who have ended up with titles that they do not love. And it's a drag because you have to stand behind the book and you should like it. You should like your title. You should like your cover. You should feel proud of them. So I feel very lucky. And I love the cover of this book too. I was so thrilled when I saw it. So that was exciting too.
So tell me how the cover came about.
Well, the cover, so just for people who are listening, the cover involves, it's an orange cover and it's got a swan wearing sunglasses looking a little bashful and the Society of Shame in big scripty letters. And honestly, it's nothing like what I expected. But when Anchor came to me with a few cover designs, it just stood out and I loved it instantly. There are swans in the book. I wouldn't say they play like a prominent role. Well,
a little bit.
Yeah, I guess they are. I guess they're recurrent characters, Sunny and Cher, the swans. But I think the swan, as used on the cover, references that, but it's also sort of a metaphor, right? You've got like the idea of pride and swan representing that, but also the ugly duckling idea and how Kathleen really is sort of an ugly duckling who becomes a swan, sort of. And there are sunglasses, and so it speaks to a lot of different things in the book, and I just love the way it all came together.
It's so fascinating to me to see how an artist or like a cover designer can interpret a story.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, and that's, like I said, I never would have expected it. So it was just thrilling to see, oh, wow, she just picked these different elements. And it also was like, oh, clearly she read the book, because if she knew about the swans, but was also able to capture the mood and the tone and make it funny, but not silly. I am in awe of designers and art directors. And through my day job, I work in advertising. I work with a lot of them, and I bow down to them. And Vianne Goyen was the name of the designer who did the cover for the Society of Shame. She's done a bunch of books recently. The one that comes immediately to mind is the cover for Such a Fun Age, which also had a great cover. There are a couple others that she's done. She's excellent.
And I like how the swan is covering up portions of the lettering.
Yes, yeah. The lettering kind of like peeks through the swan's tail, and yeah, it's nifty. And I've had fun doing swan related things. I did a cover reveal video at the public garden in Boston in front of the swan boat, so that was kind of fun.
Oh, that's very fun.
That was Jenna Blum's genius. So, and she has a swan hat that she's going to be lending me in the near future. So.
Okay, I can't wait to see that.
Yeah. I don't know if I can pull it off like she can, but I'll try.
That's too funny. Well, Jane, before we wrap up, I would love to hear what you've read recently that you really liked.
Sure, yeah. So a book that I'm actually still in the middle of reading, but I hope that's still okay, still counts, is Terra by Henriette Lazaridis. And it is a historical novel about an expedition to Antarctica. And it's also a love triangle. And it is just gorgeously, gorgeously written. The prose is incredible. The way she describes the landscape, but also describes what's happening in London at the time around the suffragette movement and conveys the sort of passions of and between these characters. It's wonderful. And I'm always a sucker for sort of adventure stories. So I'm really digging that one. Another one is also sort of an adventure story. And this isn't a new book, but I read it recently, was Erika Ferencik's River at Night, which is a sort of nature thriller thing about 4 women who go on a rafting adventure in the Maine wilderness and what happens after there's a tragic accident and they are left in the wilderness and have to figure out how to get out. And the other one is a fellow anchor author, Karen Fine, and she wrote this lovely memoir called The Other Family Doctor she's a veterinarian, and I think they're billing the book, marketing the book as a cross between Being Mortal and All Creatures Great and Small. And it really is this lovely, thoughtful book about her experiences as a vet and a pet owner, and what it's like to care for animals, and especially what it's like to care for dying and sick animals and performing euthanasia. And it's just this really, I'm not like I have cats. I'm not like a crazy animal person or anything, but I think she just does such a nice job of talking about love and loss. I definitely recommend that for pet lovers.
I'm a pet lover, and we actually had to put our sweet rescue down last summer, and it was awful. So, but that sounds like that would be an interesting book to read.
I think you might find it comforting, healing in a way. Because she herself is a pet owner, and she handles the whole thing with a really, a lot of grace and warmth. So yeah, I would check it out. The Other Family Doctor.
Okay, good. I will. And it's so interesting to see how other animals respond. We have a golden retriever, and she misses Lucy so much.
Aww.
And it's been so sad because I knew she would, but it just is kind of this constant reminder because I know she's like, where did she go?
Yeah. Oh, that is sad. We have 2 cats, and I know if one of them died, the other one would just be lost. So yeah, I'm sorry about your dog. That stinks.
Oh, thank you. We're getting another puppy so that Stella will have a friend. So I will probably be crazy for a little bit, but I think long term it will be really nice.
Oh, good. Yeah, definitely.
Well, Jane, thank you so, so much for joining me on the Thoughts from a Page podcast. I love The Society of Shame, and I can't wait for everybody else to read it.
Oh, thank you so much. This was great. Really enjoyed it. And I appreciate your kind words about the book.
Of course.
Hi there. I'm Heather Drago.
And I'm Sarah Saunders.
We host the podcast, That's a Hard No, about saying no and setting boundaries.
So you can become that true and empowered you that this world needs. Saying no isn't just okay.
It's the key to living an authentic, fulfilling life.
I'm a licensed professional clinical counselor, so while this podcast is in no way a replacement for one-on-one therapy, I suppose I know what I'm talking about.
I'd say so. We talk about learning to say no and set healthy boundaries and how it impacts mental health, physical health, relationships, parenthood, and more.
Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and visit our website, hardnopodcast.com.
We're here to help you find your no and say it unapologetically.
That's a hard no.
Thank you so much for listening to my podcast. If you like this episode, and I hope you did, please follow me on Instagram at Thoughts From A Page. Consider joining my Patreon group to access bonus content and support the podcast. Tell all of your friends about the show and rate it or subscribe to it wherever you listen to your podcasts. I would really appreciate it. The book discussed in this episode can be purchased at my bookshop storefront, and the link is in the show notes. I hope you'll tune in next time.
Hear Her Sports is a podcast for everyone who loves stories by and about women striving to improve and make a difference in their lives. I am your host, Elizabeth Emery, a former professional cyclist. In every episode, I introduce a female athlete or woman in the business of sport through a thoughtful conversation about who they are and the terrific work they're doing. My guests and I explore the glorious and frustrating issues in sports, history, equity, training, nutrition, and so much more. Join us for inspiration, for community, and for love of being a strong, athletic woman.